Okay, good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. This week's Torah study is, of course, in honor of the merit of all the Jewish people in the land of Israel, those on the front lines, those that need to be rescued, those that need a refuah shalema, those that need a complete recovery, and for all the Jewish people, wherever they may be. If you would like to sponsor a class, that is available, you may sponsor a class by commenting or sending us a message that you would like to sponsor a class. We would love for you to do that. Okay, let's get into it. This week's Torah portion is Parsha Tzav. Parsha Tzav is the second Torah portion in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, and it discusses the Mizbeach. Starts off right away talking about the cleaning of the Mizbeach, that there should always be a fire on the Mizbeach, and taking out the ashes off the Mizbeach, off the altar in the Holy Temple. So, because this Torah portion talks about the altar, we're going to discuss a story that the Talmud talks about. It's the end of Maseches Sukkah, the end of Tractate Sukkah. A fascinating story, and then we will break it down. Okay, so here's the story. Our sages taught. This is again the last words of the Talmud Tractate Sukkah. You're looking at page numbers 56b. There was a woman whose name was Miriam, the daughter of Bilgah, and she had renounced her faith, and she married a Greek officer. This is in the times of the Hanukkah story of the Hasmoneans, of the Maccabees, and she renounced her faith, she married a Greek officer, and when the Greeks stormed the Holy Temple in order to defile it, she went with them as the wife of one of the officers of this invading Greek army. That's how far she had fallen. She sees the Holy Temple, she sees the Holy Altar that we discussed on this week's Torah portion. She takes off her shoe, and she kicks or she hits it with her shoe, and she says, "Lucus, Lucus," which translates as "Wolf, wolf, how long will you eat the money of the Jewish people, and you're not standing by them in their time of need?" In other words, she's criticizing God. She's criticizing the service of the temple. When the sages heard this, so meaning after the Hanukkah story, the Jewish people take back the temple, the sages heard about this incident, and they removed the Kohanic family of Bilgah, which she was a member of. In the temple there were different families. They were called mishmarais. They were called these like watches, and every week or two they would switch. So another family had an opportunity to do the service in the Holy Temple, because it was not possible for everyone to do all the work all at once, except for holidays when there was an influx of people. There was plenty of what to do, so all the families would come. So what do the rabbis do? They took their ring and they removed them from the service of the Holy Temple. They said, you cannot, based on this story, you can no longer be associated with the Holy Temple. So the rabbis asked a very good question. Why was the entire family punished? So the rabbis say a child's conversations are picked up in the street, and she must have picked up what she had said. It must have been something that she had picked up in her home. So therefore, the rabbis felt that it was appropriate to sanction the entire family. Now, you make sense to maybe sanction the entire family, but why sanction the entire group, the entire extended family? So the rabbi says that woe to the sinner and woe to their neighbor. Woe to the wicked one and woe to his neighbor. And then they conclude that the same thing applies in the good. Good for the righteous person, and it's good for his neighbor as well. And that is how the Talmud ends in Tractate Sukkah. So there's a lot of questions we could go into the story. So we'll ask a couple questions, and these are questions that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about in a Farbrengen and a gathering in 1975. It was his mother's 10th yahrzeit, and in honor of the yahrzeit, the Rebbe was going to finish a Masechta. In this case, he was finishing a tractate of Sukkah, and he tells the story as this is the ending of the tractate, and he broke down this story and asked a few questions. So the first question is, why would you mention this woman's name? You want to say that there was a person who came, a woman, and she, did what she did. She took her shoe and she banged on the altar and said, "Wolf, wolf, how long are you going to steal money from the Jewish people and not defend them in their time of need?" Why don't you just say there was a lady? You could even say there was a lady from the family of Bilga. Why do you have to tell us what her name was? We know that the Torah tells us that we should never say something negative about somebody else. In fact, when it comes to the story of Noah, and it talks about all the animals that came to the Teva, that came to the ark, the Torah tells us there were the pure animals and the animals which were not pure. Now, it doesn't really translate well in the English, but in the English there is a word called tameh, which means impure. The Torah didn't want to say the word impure about these animals, so the Torah added words, which usually the Torah is concise, precise in its wording, and the Torah says the animals which are not pure, even though it could have just said the impure animals, essentially. And we see how important it is to speak nicely about somebody. How much more so if that's about an animal? How much more so a person? So why would the Torah name this person? So if we look in the context of who this woman was, right? We're talking about a person in a time where the Greeks had outlawed Judaism. First, the Jewish people they said anybody who has a bolt in his house should engrave on it that he has no portion in Judaism. He has no portion in the God of Israel. So the Jewish people came, the Antiochus had decreed this, the evil king in the Hanukkah story. So all the Jewish people went and they removed the bolts from their houses. They refused to participate in this. Eventually they said, if you have an ox, you have to ride on the horn of the ox. You have no part in the God of the Jewish people. The Jewish people got rid of all their oxen. And then they said that you're not allowed to use the mikvah. So the Jewish people said no problem. They closed the mikvahs. Then they said you have to go before a woman gets married. She has to go to the general and cohabitate with the general before she gets married. This is a Greek general, and the Jewish people somehow stood up to this challenge as well. And the fact that there was such a wave of assimilation amongst the Jewish people, so the Talmud is telling us that even though that there was such a tremendous amount of pressure on the Jewish people to act like a Greek, there was this one woman, similar to the Torah tells us about, there was in Parshas Emor, the Torah tells us about this woman who sinned with a Egyptian man. Her name was, the Torah tells us, Shalomis Bas Divri, from the tribe of Dan, and Rashi explains over there in Parshas Emor, the reason is because this was the exception. It was the one exception of the whole Jewish people. So actually it was a praise for the Jewish people that there's only one person ended up in this situation. And the same thing we could apply here as well. That even though the Greeks were trying to influence specifically the Jewish women, it was only this one woman who had gone so far that she actually participated in the invasion and the defiling of the Holy Temple. So that is one point that we could get to. Now, the Rebbe explains further that we know when it comes to the laws of evil speech, the laws of Lashon Hara, the Talmud tells us that Lashon Hara, evil speech, speaking badly about somebody else, kills 3 people. Who does it kill? It kills the one who speaks it, obviously. It kills the person who is spoken to, the fact that they agree to listen to such speech. And the third is it kills the person who is being spoken about. So what's the $1 million question? Well, it makes sense that the person is speaking something bad. It makes sense that they did something, they're doing an evil act of speaking negatively about somebody. It makes sense. They should be punished. Somebody who's being spoken to, and he accepts and he gives this person an opportunity to sin, obviously makes sense. They should be punished. But what did the person who's being spoken about, what did they do wrong? So our sages explain that actually this kind of evil speech is not referring to something like slander or libel, something that somebody did not do but is being alleged to have done or being accused of that is not true. We're talking about somebody who did something wrong. They had done something wrong, and the fact that they had done something wrong was now being revealed. In other words, when somebody does something but it's quiet, they are not. We still see them as a good person, but now this person has a new identity by being spoken about in a negative light, even though it was something that they had actually done. Now their thing that they had done is being revealed. So therefore, this person is now he has a new identity as somebody who did a sin. So therefore, he has to be punished for the sin that he had done, and that is why even the person who is being spoken about is punished as well. Now, our sages tell us, how much more so is this in a situation where somebody did something good? If somebody does something good and we say the good thing that they did, how much more so? Because we know that God is really good. So therefore, the measure of good is greater than the measure of evil. So therefore, when we speak something good about something, we change their identity. We make this person into a new person. So the Rebbe wants to explain this idea and say, maybe we could find a way to speak positively about this woman, Miriam Bas Bilga. Not just the fact that she was the only one who behaved in this way, but somebody that we could find a way to speak positively about and bring some merit to her. And he brought an example from a story that is written in that was a story passed down from previous generations about the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And there's a story there. It's an amazing story, fascinating story, that there was a person who was unfortunately suffering from some sort of mental illness. And they brought them to the Alter Rebbe, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was the first Chabad Rebbe, and asked him to, maybe there's a blessing, he could bless this person who was going through some sort of mental crisis, some sort of derangement. So the Alter Rebbe right away started talking about Zechariah. Now, the story of Zechariah is as follows. Zechariah was a prophet. In Divrei Hayamim, in the book of Chronicles, it says that the Jewish people had abandoned God and they were worshiping idols. And God sent the prophet Zechariah to admonish, or Zechariah in Hebrew, to admonish the Jewish people. And he told them that if you look in the book of Chronicles, he says, "So says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord? You will not succeed because you have forsaken God. He has forsaken you." And essentially predicting that the temple would be destroyed. And the people conspired against him, and they stoned Zechariah in the courtyard of the temple, in God's house. A really tragic story that happened in the times of Zechariah, in times of the temple. So going back to the story, this is what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Start talking about Zechariah, and he explained as follows: we know that the reason we know that when a prophet has a prophecy, there's a biblical law. The Torah tells us that you must say the prophecy. In other words, you've been given a mission by God to say a prophecy. You have to go and say the prophecy. There's no other option. And if the prophecy is verbalized, then it must be fulfilled as well. In other words, a prophecy can only come true if it is verbalized by the prophet. Even though he's been given the mission to say it, the actual thing that he's predicting, that he's prophesizing about, does not come into fruition until he actually says it. So the Alter Rebbe explained, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman explained, that why was Zechariah killed by these people? Because they didn't want him to verbalize his prophecy that would predict the destruction of the temple. So they said, if we allow this guy this prophet of God, has been given a mission by God to to say this prophecy, it's for sure going to happen because everything that he's a prophet of God, it's going to for sure happen. So why don't we kill him before he has a chance? And obviously, it didn't work. He ended up saying his thing, and he was killed. But this was kind of finding a justification for the murderers of the prophet Zechariah. So after the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, said the story, this man became sane again. And the Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, explained as follows. This man, his soul, was one of Zechariah's killers. And by finding a justification for the killers of Zechariah, this person was able to kind of be saved. That was the story that was passed down from amongst the Chabad Hasidim for many generations, for a couple hundred years. So the Rebbe said the idea is that if we find that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was able to find a justification for something historically done that's in the historical canon, something that happened a couple thousand years ago, was able to find the justification for it, he's kind of paved the way that we could do the same thing as well. So how can we find a justification for this woman, Miriam Bas Bilga? And he brought another story to demonstrate this point of paving the path for something to be done. There was a story of Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch of the Code of Jewish Law. If you follow our weekly Tuesday, here's a plug for our Tuesday class that comes posted on Tuesdays. It's going to be coming up in a couple months, God willing. We're going to talk about Rabbi Yosef Karo. Maybe we'll even say the story again. But the story goes that he was once, the whole night, was struggling with a piece of Talmud. And he's trying to understand it. And finally, at the crack of dawn, he figures it out. And he's so excited. And he's jumping for joy. And he's finally heading home after a long night of study. Or he's heading to synagogue, wherever he was heading. And he looks in the window of one of the study halls in the city of Safat in Israel, where he lived at the time. And he peeks in the window and he sees a young man studying the exact same passage that he was learning. And this person learned it with this explanation that he had broke his head the whole night trying to figure out this explanation. He finally figured out this explanation to understand the Talmud. And this person learned it like this was the obvious thing. And he was so disappointed. He thought maybe he's stupid, maybe he has some sort of spiritual, calamity is happening to him. He can't understand the Talmud, that this person learned simply that this was the explanation. He had to study the whole night to understand the simple explanation of the Talmud, and he was very distraught. And he meets in synagogue that morning. He meets Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, also known as the Arizal, the great Kabbalist, and they engage in conversation. And the Arizal says, I know what's bothering you. I see you're upset. And I know that you're upset because you saw somebody studying the Talmud and they seem to understand it much better than you. And he says, it's not true. The truth is that when you had to bring this explanation into the world, you had to break your head. You had to, because you're fighting to bring this explanation down from heaven into the world. And once you brought it in, now this is the explanation of the Talmud. So everybody else has access to it, but it's only because of the path that you paved forward for everybody to study this Talmud. So the Rebbe said that maybe we could apply the same thing to this situation. We could find justification for historical wrongdoings and maybe bring some sort of merit to this person. So the Rebbe explains as follows. This woman was a woman who obviously, as we've already explained, had gone off the path. She not only had married somebody who wasn't Jewish, she married a Greek officer, and she joined the invaders of the Holy Temple. She engaged in the defilation of the Holy Temple, which we know that they brought a pig, and they brought a pig as an offering, God forbid, in the Holy Temple, an impure animal. We're studying now in the book of Vayikra all the laws of which animals can be brought, only kosher animals, and even within that, only specific animals. And they defiled the temple with a pig and all other defilements. And she joined them. And the Torah views her as a regular Jewish woman. That even though this is somebody who had gone so far, you would think, okay, why is she being punished? Why is her family being punished? Not because she sinned by marrying out of the faith, not because she denounced her Judaism, not because she's part of the invaders, but because she criticized the altar. What bothered her? This is a Jewish woman. What bothered her What bothered her was that she, in that moment, when she sees the altar in the Holy Temple, what bothered her was her Jewish neshama came out, her soul came out, and she says, how could it be? This Holy Temple, the God's house, is not protecting his Jewish nation from the defilement that I'm being part of. And in that moment, God said, I'm going to punish you for this because this is where your soul came out. In other words, the Jewish people are not punished. We don't get consequences for our actions because God does not like us. It's the other way around. The Jewish people are specifically punished for the things that we do wrong because God loves us. It's kind of when, as a parent, if you see another child doing something, you kind of just ignore it, even if it's something that you think is negative, even if it's something that's objectively negative, even if you think that the parents need your help, you're like, it's not my business, it's someone else's kid. But when it comes to your own kid, you see them doing something wrong right away. You think about, what do I have to do to correct that action of my child? Do I have to punish them? How do I stop them? And the same thing happened in this situation, that this woman was judged because she recognized that she was part of the Jewish people. So God said, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to correct you. I'm going to punish your family. And not only that, I'm going to make a teaching for all generations, a teaching that's going to come through you, that when one person is good, and this is the teaching that comes out of it, that there's something bad for an evil person, it's bad for his neighbor. And what's the positive of that is also taught from this woman, that if somebody is good, how much more so is it good for their neighbor? And so when a Jew meets another Jew, and sometimes we see this person and we see them and we think, what do I have to do with this person? I participate in Judaism. This person doesn't. It's very obvious. And the person is even willing to tell you, I'm not observant. I'm not somebody who identifies as Jewish. And God forbid, they might even say things that are detrimental to the Jewish faith. They're detrimental to the Jewish nation, detrimental to the Jewish people, detrimental to the land of Israel. We all know people like this that we sometimes encounter, that they say, I don't want to be part of the Jewish nation. And we think, what do I have to do with this person? Maybe I should, kind of be like the parent that sees a child misbehaving in public. Just, it's none of my business. The Talmud tells us no, that when you see somebody and he is your neighbor, you can have a positive influence on them. And this person's soul could come out, just like Miriam Bas Bilga, this woman, that when she saw the Holy Temple, even though she was an invader, when she saw the Holy Temple, we saw that who she really was. She was a Jewish woman. She was a Jewish soul. She was very lost. Yes, she was extremely lost. But God brought her close. God said, I'm going to treat you like one of my children. I'm going to admonish you. I'm going to make you part of the family. And I'm going to teach Jewish people something forever, that when they meet a neighbor, when somebody is their neighbor, it's not that we should pull back and we should say, I don't want to be that person's neighbor. No, we have to engage with that person. We have to influence them in a positive way. And like we said earlier, that how much more so when it comes to good compared to bad, that God is truly good. So therefore, if it comes to somebody who does something negative and it has a ripple effect, how much more so when somebody does something positive. So we should take from this story about the holy altar in the holy temple, that when it comes to somebody who we sometimes may not agree with, who we sometimes may be true that they're doing something detrimental to the Jewish people, we have to recognize that they may be lost, they may be very lost, but we can have an influence on them. That is a lesson that we can learn from this story, this very interesting and amazing story, and the way that the Rabbi taught it in 1975 and the 10th anniversary of his mother's passing. Wishing you a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.